Hi everybody, I'm Meredith Baker for On the Map Off the Radar, and today we have an exciting environmental episode with Andrew Abraham, who just finished his Master's in Environmental Studies at Oxford. He's going to talk to us about how animal movement can affect nutrient cycles around the globe and how we as humans play a role in that in unexpected ways. Riveting. Andrew, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure is all mine. But can you go ahead and talk about how animal movement affects nutrient cycles?
Absolutely. So animals, and particularly herbivores, by eating organic matter which contains nutrients, all the nutrients directly themselves, and then through their movement, and then via the processes of either excretion from their urine or their feces, or when they die, they move these nutrients from one point to another. And individually, these nutrient movements may be small, but if you consider over a continental scale or over a 100-year time period, these processes may actually be very important.
And you're saying this has never been looked at before in environmental models, is that correct?
Absolutely. So there have been studies that have looked at these processes, however, they have not been modelled at that sort of scale before. So we know that the process is happening, and the work that I'm part of is trying to assess or quantify how big a process this is.
So when you were starting off in this research, how did it happen? You were looking at other environmental models and you noticed this kind of missing factor that hadn't been discussed about or factored into?
Yeah, sort of. So the model that I'm working on is a very new model. It's called the Mattingly model, and it works, it's a bottom-up process-based model. So previously, ecosystem models have always been top-down, and they've tried to sort of impose sort of constrain the model based on certain parameters that you attribute to certain animals. However, what we're trying to do here is to represent ecological processes, so sort of the most basic ecological processes that occur, things like reproduction, mortality. We represent different sorts of animals, so we represent herbivores and carnivores and omnivores, the different ways that they reproduce, and through the interactions of these different sorts of animals, we're able to build up, or sort of a pattern emerges over time that you're able to assess, and you can compare that to the real world to look and see what sorts of processes and how these processes are important.
And as humans, which are also animals, how do we play a role in these animal movements, and how is that detrimental to the environment? So
of the animals that move nutrients, the particularly important ones are megafauna, or large animals, because they tend to have a much longer gut residence times and they tend to eat more. So therefore, because if you imagine, say for example, an elephant versus a mouse will tend to always return to the same place. It tends not to eat very much. It tends to defecate only within a small area, or urinate only within a small area. So the movement of nutrients is relatively small. However, if you consider an elephant, which may perhaps up to 300 kilograms of organic matter a day and may walk 10s, 20s of kilometers, their movement of nutrients is disproportionately large. And the reason I'm saying that is because over the last 130,000 years, humans, through hunting and through changes of habitat, have particularly targeted large animals and made those go extinct. And particularly if you look at the Americas, both North and South America have lost a number of their, or pretty much all of their large animals, for which this process is very important. And then if you combine that with the fact that humans have built a lot of fences around the world, the animals which do remain are actually very much constrained with the areas with which they're able to go. So that sort of the human role of both changing the abundance of large animals and changing where these large animals can go, we think may actually have a very important effect across the world.
And then this type of information that your model could provide then would be very important or helpful for organizations fighting to protect endangered species.
Yeah, so what it would really do for conservation groups and for governments is it'd be another sort of string in the bow to suggest that these animals provide a number of different services, or ecosystem services as they're called. People like to know that there is a polar bear in the Arctic. People know that, whether they provide meat or whatever it is that these animals provide, and this is another service that they will provide, and it will just give another sort of bit more weight to the reasoning as to why it is really important that we protect these animals, because through the movements of nutrients, and when we say nutrients, it may be nitrogen or phosphorus or sodium or any of the very important nutrients to animals and to humans, and we're all reaping the rewards of those movements.
Right. So as you briefly mentioned sodium, in your research you mentioned that there is this dichotomy between, in terms of nutrient movement, animals needing sodium and then sodium being detrimental to plants, and how these are interlinked in this model. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so what we really see in the world is that on a sort of continental scale, most sodium into ecosystems comes from the oceans, and sodium is incredibly important to all animals. No animal can live without sodium, just through the metabolic processes that use it to keep itself alive. Whereas conversely, plants find sodium toxic. There's a few hyalophytic plants that are able to cope in saline environments, but for the most part plants find it highly toxic and can't grow in very salty conditions. So what we're seeing here is regions with very high salt concentration at the coast, very low salt concentration in the continental interiors. And the work that we're trying to suggest, or this ecosystem service, is the role that animals will play in flattening this gradient by eating high sodium organic matter at the coast, and then through random dispersal, and then through the processes that I mentioned before in terms of urination, defecation and dying, they will tend to flatten over time this gradient, which a number of studies have shown that has important consequences both for animal and ecosystem composition and also for changing global biogeochemical cycles. And as soon as you're talking about impacting global geochemical cycles, you're talking about real potential large changes to the atmosphere and to climate.
So it's kind of like a butterfly effect, something that you think might have just such a small impact on the environment is actually kind of...
Within the Earth system there are many different feedbacks, and a change in one area, say for example, so with the sodium, it tends to change the decomposition rate. So if you add sodium, often these continental interiors are sodium deficient, so when you add sodium to those places, the small little invertebrates that are the primary decomposers in those areas greatly increase in number, and by increasing in number they break down organic matter and release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. So what we're seeing at the moment is potential large stores of carbon held in plant matter that's not being decomposed in continental interiors, and maybe previously, before 100,000 years ago, when large animals were abundant, that process was maybe happening a little bit faster, and that's very important to the whole Earth system.
Wow. Well, who knew? And can you talk now about, I know you're moving to Arizona to continue your research, and what the next steps will be in the model and kind of using it in...
For sure. So I'm moving to Arizona to work with Professor Chris Doughty. And particularly we're going to hope, so the work that we were doing in Oxford was quite constrained by the size of the computers that we were working on, whereas out in Arizona we're going to be working with a much larger computer that will have the capacity to run many more of these mathematical calculations over a shorter period of time, so we'll be able to represent the world in a slightly more complex way. So for example, simply to allow the model to be able to run, I had to negate the importance of predation in the model runs that we've done previously. So hopefully we're going to be able to increase the complexity of the model that we're running, and also, as with all of these things, the strength of the model is only as to how good it can represent the real world. And even then, it only gives a direction of the sorts of processes and the importance of things that it might be. So there's also going to be hopefully another field campaign out to Africa to collect a much more substantial data set than we have already, to try and look to see the importance of which these large animals play in moving nutrients like sodium around the planet.
That's so interesting, and it's awesome that you're kind of the first group doing this important work on something that has been previously left out of kind of calculations and changes to the environment.
Absolutely, and that's what we're trying to find at the moment, is we know the process happens. You can take measurements and you can see that within animal feces and animal urine there is high concentrations of urine and of nutrients, and what we're now trying to do is upscale these very small processes to see how important they are at the global scale. And we're making strides towards that, and hopefully in the next 12 months or so we should be able to say with a little bit more certainty as to the importance that these biotic processes actually have within the Earth system.
Wow, well thank you so much, Andrew, and thanks
pleasure.
everybody for watching. I'll be sure to link to Andrew's research if you'd like to learn more about megafauna being mega fun and all other environmental exciting things. Thanks so much for watching Meredith Baker on the Map.